The morning train pulled into the city with a soft metallic screech, and among the scattered passengers stepping off was a small, hunched woman with a worn-out brown suitcase in one hand and a bundle of vegetables in the other. Her sandals were old and cracked, the thin fabric of her shirt fluttering in the wind like something out of time. Her name was Mrs. Huang, and for over 60 years she had lived in the quiet countryside, her days filled with farming, cooking, and memories of a husband long buried and a son who now rarely called. Today was different. Today, she had finally been invited to visit his home in the city. She smiled to herself, her heart fluttering with a mix of nerves and pride, gripping the ticket stub tighter as she walked toward the exit. She had not seen her daughter-in-law, Lynn, since their wedding 5 years ago. And even then, Lynn had worn sunglasses the entire ceremony and barely looked her in the eye. Mrs. Huang told herself that things would be better now. Her son Nam had called last week and said, "Mom, come stay for a while. Lynn wants you to see the baby." She had cried when she hung up, not because of joy alone, but because she had longed to be part of their lives. She arrived at the entrance of the high-rise complex, clutching her bag and staring up at the building like it was a monument. The security guard at the front gave her a look that made her shift uncomfortably. "I'm here to see Nam Nguyen, 15th floor," she said softly. He hesitated, then called up to confirm. After a moment he waved her in, and she shuffled past with a nervous bow. When she reached the 15th floor, the door opened before she could even knock. Her son stood there in a dress shirt and slacks, holding his baby girl, smiling with surprise. "Mom, you really came." He stepped forward and embraced her, careful not to crush the vegetables she was still holding. "I brought morning glory and cassava, fresh, from our garden," she said, her voice trembling. He laughed, nodding. "She'll love that, come in." The apartment was unlike anything she'd known. Glossy marble floors, glass furniture, abstract paintings, cold, modern, and shining. She felt like she had stepped into a catalog, afraid to touch anything. Lynn appeared from the hallway in a fitted cream dress, her hair tied neatly, face made up like a television anchor. She gave a tight smile. "Mother," she said, nodding. "Daughter," Mrs. Huang replied with a bow. Lynn's eyes lingered on her sandals. Then her shirt. Then the vegetables. Nam took his mother's bag and guided her to the couch. "Sit, Mom, you must be tired." She perched at the edge of the cushion, back straight, hands on her knees, like a schoolgirl in a principal's office. She tried to smile. She tried not to notice how Lynn wrinkled her nose at the earthy scent from the bag. Over lunch, Mrs. Huang reached for a plate with her own chopsticks and offered Lynn a piece of steamed pork. "Good for your skin, slow cooked," she said. Lynn blinked, gave a polite smile, and said nothing. Later, as they sat watching the baby nap, Lynn turned to Nam. "We should take her to the mall tomorrow." Nam hesitated. "The mall?" "Yes, she needs something proper to wear." Mrs. Huang heard it. She looked down at her faded blouse, a floral print popular 2 decades ago, and said, "This is fine. I'm just here to see the baby." Lynn gave her a practiced smile. "It's not about you, Mother, people judge. It reflects on Nam." The words stung. Nam looked down, silent. That night in the guest room, Mrs. Huang unfolded her clothes and placed them gently into the wardrobe. Each piece was neatly washed and ironed by hand. A soft green ao-ba-ba, a sweater with a loose thread, her late husband's scarf folded like a secret. She sat at the edge of the bed and whispered, "Maybe I'm too old for this world." The next morning, Lynn had already left for work. Nam made breakfast. Mrs. Huang fed the baby mashed sweet potato, humming lullabies in a voice hoarse from years of silence. In the afternoon, she tried to help clean. But Lynn returned, stared at the dishes, and said, "Mom, please don't. The helper will do it." Then she handed her a brochure for a spa. "Why don't you go get a facial or something?" Mrs. Huang smiled awkwardly. "My face is too old to fix." That evening, a family dinner was planned with some of Lynn's colleagues. Mrs. Huang wore her finest, the green ao-ba-ba, sandals scrubbed clean, and a touch of perfume saved from New Year's. As they were about to leave, Lynn looked at her and whispered to Nam, I can't take her like that. He frowned. She's your mother. Lin crossed her arms. She looks rural. Mrs. Huang stood in the doorway, hearing every word. She didn't speak. She just turned, walked to the guest room, and began to pack. Nam followed, alarmed. Mom, what are you doing? I forgot, she said gently, folding her scarf. I left the chickens out back. They'll be frightened. He touched her shoulder. Stay, please. She smiled through her eyes. The city's too bright, son. I don't belong in glass houses. And before dawn the next day, she left quietly. She left behind the vegetables. She left behind a folded ba. But she took the baby's photo she'd slipped into her pocket. And the pain of a visit that wasn't truly a welcome. The countryside welcomed her return with familiar sounds, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of bamboo leaves, the distant bark of dogs greeting the dawn. Mrs. Huang stepped off the bus with a small sigh, clutching her empty bag tighter than when she had left. Her heart felt heavier now, as if the city had pulled something from her and refused to return it. She walked the dirt path back to her modest home, a small tiled house surrounded by banana trees and vegetable beds. The front gate creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, dust had settled in her absence, but everything waited patiently, untouched. She boiled water on the wood stove and made herself a cup of tea, sitting quietly on the bamboo bench near the window. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the baby's photograph she had taken from the city. She traced the child's face with her fingertip. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't cry out loud. The countryside had taught her to cry without sound. News spread quickly in the village that she had returned early. Neighbors asked why her visit had been so short. She smiled and said, the baby caught a cold, they needed quiet. No one questioned further. But they noticed her smile didn't reach her eyes. Days passed, then weeks. She returned to the fields, tending to her morning glory and cassava, her hands buried in familiar soil. But something inside her remained untethered. The nights were longer. The silence deeper. One afternoon, while pulling weeds, a motorbike pulled up in front of her gate. It was her neighbor's son, holding a smartphone. Back Huang, have you seen this? She squinted at the screen. A video was going viral, an elderly woman giving her last sweet potato to a homeless man near a bus stop. It was her. She had forgotten someone was recording. She waved it away. It's nothing, just kindness. But the internet didn't think so. The story of a poor village woman giving all she had to a stranger in the city captured hearts. Commenters called her Vietnam's grandmother, the soul of the country, the woman with the richest heart. By the end of the week, a local reporter visited her home. He asked about her life, about her son, about why she gave away her food despite having so little. She smiled gently. Because I knew what it felt like to be looked at like I didn't belong. He didn't press further. The article was published the next day, with her photo under a headline that read, Rural Mother with Nothing Teaches City Everything. It exploded online. She was invited to a morning show in Hanoi. At first she refused. Then the host sent her a handwritten letter, saying, We want your story to reach people who have forgot how to be human. She agreed. The station sent a car to pick her up. She wore her green ba, freshly washed and sun-dried. At the studio, everyone treated her like royalty. Makeup artists offered to style her, but she declined. I want them to see me, not someone they wish I was. The interview aired live. Millions watched as she talked about her life, her love for her son, and how sometimes love isn't enough when pride stands in the way. She never said Lin's name. Never blamed. She only said, we must learn to love without conditions, but we must also learn to let go when love is not returned. Her voice was calm. Her presence magnetic. Back in the city, Lin's phone buzzed nonstop. Her colleagues stared. Isn't this your mother-in-law? Nam watched the broadcast in silence. His chest tightened with every word. He remembered her eyes the day she left. He remembered not stopping her. That night, Nam sat at the foot of their bed, holding the baby. He looked at Lin. She wasn't embarrassing, we were. Lin said nothing. He continued, she left with kindness, we stayed with shame. Lin closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt small. The next day, Nam called his mother. No answer. He called again. And again. 3 days later, he took a train. The same one his mother had used. He arrived at dawn, dusty and tired, holding the baby close. When she opened the gate and saw them, she dropped the watering can. The baby reached out. Barin letter 1ED9I. Mrs. Huang froze. Then wept. Not because they came, but because they remembered how to return. She made breakfast the next morning, humming an old folk tune as she fried up some sweet potatoes and sliced papaya from the garden. Nam sat at the small wooden table, rocking the baby in his lap, his eyes red-rimmed but peaceful in a way he hadn't felt in years. Mrs. Huang didn't say much, but her smile returned, soft and full of knowing. The baby giggled as she fed him mashed banana and rice. Nam looked around her little home, the clay walls, the wooden beams, the faded photos on the altar. He said, I forgot how warm this house was. She chuckled. It's always warm when hearts are open. After breakfast, they walked to the market together. Villagers greeted them with admiration, many nodding respectfully to Mrs. Huang. One woman handed her a bouquet of wildflowers. For your kindness, CH letter 1ECB Huang, she said. Mrs. Huang accepted it shyly, glancing at Nam. I've done nothing special. But the world had decided otherwise. As they walked past the village hall, a banner had been hung up high. Welcome home to our village hero, Ba Huang. Nam blinked. He had never seen his mother receive attention like that. He had never even thought to give it. At night, they sat outside under the stars. The baby slept in a hammock, swaying gently. Nam turned to his mother. Mom, I want to bring you back to the city, but this time it will be different. She shook her head slowly. The city is not for me, but you, my son, you must learn to see it with different eyes. He nodded. Then come visit often. Let the baby grow up knowing your hands. She smiled. I'll come when the cassava blooms. They laughed together, and for the first time in a long time, nothing between them was unsaid. Meanwhile, back in the city, Lin sat in the empty apartment, scrolling through the news articles, the comments, the video clips. She watched her mother-in-law's interview again. The line that stayed with her, sometimes love isn't enough when pride stands in the way. She stared at her reflection in the black TV screen. She looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from a life spent chasing things that never filled her. She opened the closet and took out the box her husband never touched. Inside were letters, old, handwritten letters from his mother when he first moved away. Each one ended with, I'm proud of you, don't forget to eat warm meals. Lin ran her fingers across the faded ink. That evening she cooked dinner alone. For the first time, she didn't order takeout or arrange it on designer plates. She used the cast iron pot her husband once said reminded him of home. The next morning, she boarded the same train. The carriage was quiet. The ride long. She wore a simple blouse, no jewelry, no makeup, just a heart full of questions. When she stepped off the bus at the village stop, the air smelled like smoke and flowers. She followed the dirt path toward the house with trembling hands. When Mrs. Huang opened the door, she stood still, her eyes scanning the face of the woman who once turned away. Lin bowed deeply. M letter 1EB9, Con Zin L letter 1ED7I. The words broke. Mrs. Huang didn't speak right away. Then she stepped aside. Come in, the rice is warm. They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Lin helped wash the dishes after. She asked, can I learn to cook this? Mrs. Huang nodded. Only if you're willing to touch the soil. They went into the garden. Together they pulled weeds and harvested morning glory. The city faded. The past softened. Two women bent over the earth, their differences dissolving into the rose of green. That night, Lin laid on the mat next to her mother-in-law, the baby nestled between them. She whispered, "I never knew what peace looked like." Mrs. Huang replied, "It's not something you see, it's something you carry." And under that quiet roof, peace wrapped them like a lullaby. The next morning, the rooster crowed as golden light spilled through the bamboo window, casting gentle shadows across the floor. Lin woke first, blinking at the unfamiliar simplicity around her. She looked to her left and saw her baby still sleeping peacefully beside his grandmother. There was something grounding about the smell of firewood and the chirping of sparrows outside. She slipped out of bed and tiptoed into the yard, where dew still clung to the vegetable leaves. Mrs. Huang was already up, kneeling in the garden with her hands deep in the soil. Lin stood for a moment, unsure of whether to speak or help. Then she crouched beside her without a word, letting her hands sink into the earth. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. It was a language neither had spoken before, but now understood. They picked water, spinach, mint, and lemongrass, placing them in a woven basket. As they worked, Lin asked quietly, "Did you always do this by yourself?" Mrs. Huang wiped her brow and nodded. "Since Nam's father passed, the garden keeps me company." Lin felt a sudden ache in her chest, a weight of unspoken regrets. "You shouldn't have had to be alone so long." Mrs. Huang smiled without bitterness. "Loneliness is not the same as being forgotten. I was only truly alone when you asked me to leave." The words were soft, but landed like a bell toll in Lin's chest. She looked down, digging deeper into the soil, ashamed. Later that morning, they cooked together. Lin sliced the shallots, while Mrs. Huang pounded garlic and chili in a mortar. The aroma of ginger and lemongrass filled the small kitchen. The baby played on a bamboo mat, gurgling as if he, too, knew something had changed. At noon, they set the table under the guava tree. Nam returned from a walk to find the two women laughing, Lin wiping her hands on her apron. He stopped at the gate, watching them for a moment, emotion swelling in his throat. He joined them, and they ate in the open air with birds singing in the distance. For dessert, Lin brought out jackfruit, clumsily peeled but lovingly arranged. "I'm learning," she said, smiling shyly. Mrs. Huang nodded. "We all are." That afternoon, a woman from the local women's union stopped by the house. She had come to deliver a letter, an official invitation. Mrs. Huang had been selected to receive an award in Hanoi for her story of kindness and humility. She hesitated to accept. "I'm just a mother," she said, holding the paper with trembling hands. But Nam and Lin insisted. "You're more than that," Nam said. "You're a light people need right now." The day of the award ceremony arrived. Mrs. Huang wore her best ao ba and a new pair of shoes Lin had secretly bought at the village market. They took the train together, just as she had once done alone, but this time with company, with laughter, with a child on her lap. In Hanoi, the venue sparkled with lights and cameras. People lined up to greet her, shake her hand, take photos. She looked nervous but composed. When her name was called, she walked slowly to the stage, the applause washing over her like a warm tide. She stood behind the microphone, adjusting it slightly. Then she spoke. "I am not important, I am not educated, I grow vegetables and cook rice." The room fell silent. "But I know what it feels like to be told you don't belong, and I know what it feels like to be held again after forgiveness." Her voice trembled but did not break. "If this award means anything, let it be a reminder that love should never be based on appearances, and respect is not something reserved for those with wealth." A standing ovation followed. Backstage, reporters asked about her daughter-in-law. She smiled. "She came back, that is enough." They returned to the village with a trophy, but also with something greater, clarity. Lin now walked differently. She greeted villagers with a slight bow, helped carry water buckets, and sat with older women to learn recipes. She wrote letters to her own estranged mother, hoping for a similar reconciliation. Nam built a new room beside the house, a simple guest room with a large window facing the garden. They didn't call it an extension. They called it a continuation. Weeks later, while harvesting cassava, Mrs. Huang laughed and said, Well, it bloomed, so now I have to visit you in the city. They all laughed, and this time there was no tension. Just 3 generations, rooted in the soil, growing upward. And in that laughter, the pain of the past finally dissolved into something whole. Something called family. The day they returned to the city felt entirely different than the first time. This time, the air didn't feel cold, and the silence in the apartment didn't feel strained. Mrs. Huang stepped inside slowly, taking in the space with softened eyes. Lin had rearranged a few things. There was now a small altar by the window, a wooden stool by the kitchen where the baby liked to sit. Everything felt warmer, lived in, honest. Nam helped his mother unpack her bag. She had brought some dried herbs, sun-dried fish wrapped in banana leaves, and small jars of homemade chili oil. Lin, now used to the scent of rural simplicity, smiled and took them gratefully. That evening they cooked together again. The kitchen, once a sterile place of silence, now buzzed with clinks and sizzling oil, with laughter and chatter. Mrs. Huang taught Lin how to make banzio from scratch. They flipped crepes together while the baby clapped from his high chair. The next morning, Lin took her mother-in-law to the local park. It was something small, something ordinary, but they walked side by side as if it were a ritual. Several older women nodded politely at them. Some even recognized Mrs. Huang from the award ceremony. One woman approached with her teenage daughter. "Are you the mother who gave sweet potatoes to the old beggar?" Mrs. Huang chuckled. "I just gave what I had." Lin watched the interaction, pride blooming inside her like spring. The apartment no longer felt like a showroom. It became a place where stories were told, where seeds of forgiveness had taken root and were now growing. Lin hung a framed photo of the 3 of them, taken in the village, on the living room wall. Right below it, she placed a short quote from Mrs. Huang. "Peace is something you carry, not something you chase." Visitors often paused in front of that wall. And every time someone asked, Lin would smile and say, "That's my mother-in-law. She changed everything." In the following weeks, Lin signed up for a community cooking class. She invited women from her building to join. Together, they recreated some of Mrs. Huang's recipes, simple, nourishing, and filled with meaning. Mrs. Huang would sit in a chair, directing with gentle authority, occasionally correcting a pinch of salt or a fold in a leaf. The women listened like students around a quiet master. Even the children from nearby apartments began dropping by. They'd sit on the rug and listen to her stories, not knowing they were being handed legacy disguised as bedtime tales. Nam returned from work one evening to find the apartment filled with smells from the village. His wife laughing freely, his mother telling stories, his child asleep in the middle of the room, safe and loved. He stood in the doorway and knew something unexplainable had shifted in his life. That night, after everyone went to sleep, Nam sat beside his mother with a cup of tea. He looked at her hands, weathered, strong, and beautiful. "I don't say it enough," he whispered, "but thank you, Mom." Mrs. Huang didn't reply right away. She just reached over and placed her hand gently over his. Raising a child doesn't stop when they grow up, it just becomes quieter. In the weeks that followed, Lin's relationship with her own mother began to heal. She sent photos of the baby, called every Sunday. Eventually, she invited her mother to visit. The day the 2 mothers met was simple but powerful. They sat across from each other on the couch. Lin watched nervously, but Mrs. Huang broke the silence by offering a cup of tea and saying, "We both raised strong children. Let's drink to that." From that day, a new chapter began. One not rooted in resentment, but in rebuilding. Their lives no longer revolved around pretending to be perfect. They revolved around being present. Each weekend, they invited a neighbor or friend for lunch. The dining table became a place of gathering, of joy, of honest conversation. And the apartment that once felt too glossy to live in now bore the fingerprints of a family, finally at peace. In time, even strangers heard about their story. A local magazine did a feature on intergenerational wisdom. The title read, "From Roots to Roofs, a story of a mother who changed the city." Mrs. Huang laughed when she read it. I didn't change the city, she said. I just stayed true to the soil. But Lynn knew better. And so did everyone who'd seen the way one woman, quiet and unassuming, had turned a fractured home into a flourishing legacy. Not with riches, not with status, but with love, humility, and the strength to forgive. Autumn arrived with golden leaves skittering across the sidewalks and cool wind weaving through the apartment windows. Mrs. Huang stood on the balcony in a simple knit sweater Lynn had given her, sipping tea as she watched the city bustle below. The baby toddled beside her now, chubby hands clutching the railing as he mimicked her every move. He had begun calling her Ba-en letter 1ed9I with clarity, and each time it filled the room with warmth. Lynn came out, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. You've changed this home more than any designer ever could, she said softly. Mrs. Huang smiled. It wasn't the home that needed changing, child. Later that week, the family decided to host a small gathering in their apartment. It wasn't for any holiday or birthday, it was simply to say thank you. Neighbors, friends, and even a few strangers who had once seen the viral video attended. The hallway outside buzzed with conversation, the smell of lemongrass and rice drifting down the corridor. Lynn and Mrs. Huang cooked together all morning. They made sticky rice with peanuts, caramelized pork belly, pickled mustard greens, and sweet mung bean soup. When guests arrived, they were greeted with slippers, warm smiles, and a story in every corner of the home. Mrs. Huang sat in her usual chair, telling stories to a group of wide-eyed children. She spoke of planting cassava, of chasing chickens in the rain, of how kindness was like water. It always found a way to flow back. Nam stood beside her, watching with admiration. His wife stood just behind, her apron still flour-stained, her arms crossed loosely, her face peaceful. When one woman whispered to Lynn, "You're so lucky to have a mother-in-law like her," Lynn replied, "I almost missed my chance to see it." As the evening wore on, the apartment glowed with soft lights and even softer laughter. The baby fell asleep on the couch, his head resting in Mrs. Huang's lap. She stroked his hair gently, humming a lullaby that only Nam recognized from childhood. That night, when everyone had gone, Lynn poured tea for the two of them and sat on the floor by her mother-in-law's feet. "I used to think love needed to be loud to be real," she said. "But you've shown me otherwise." Mrs. Huang brushed a lock of hair from Lynn's cheek. "Love isn't quiet because it's weak, it's quiet because it's sure." In the months that followed, the apartment became a sanctuary not just for family, but for others. Young mothers came seeking advice. Elderly neighbors stopped by to share meals or memories. Volunteers from a nearby shelter invited Lynn and Mrs. Huang to teach cooking classes to displaced women. They accepted. It wasn't about charity. It was about sharing what they had found, healing in simplicity. One afternoon, a television crew came to film a short documentary about the family. They followed Mrs. Huang through the market, then into the kitchen, then to the little bench by the window where she liked to sit and tell stories. When asked what her secret was, she looked into the camera and said, "I didn't teach them anything new, I just reminded them of what they forgot." The video aired nationwide. Letters flooded in from viewers who were moved, inspired, and transformed. Some had repaired relationships with their own parents. Others had gone home after years of silence. The family received invitations to speak at forums, schools, and community centers. Most they declined, choosing instead to keep doing what mattered, being present for those closest. As the new year approached, Lynn printed small calendars as gifts for neighbors. Each month featured a photo of the family in the kitchen, in the garden, or on the balcony with the baby. The final page included a quote from Mrs. Huang, "Family isn't who you live with, it's who makes you feel you've come home." On New Year's Eve, they gathered on the rooftop to watch fireworks. The baby clapped at every burst of light. Nam held his wife's hand, and Mrs. Huang leaned against the railing, her scarf fluttering. Lynn looked up at her. "Thank you for not giving up on us." Mrs. Huang didn't answer. She simply reached down and took Lynn's hand. And for a moment, time paused. In that rooftop silence, above the chaos of the city, 3 generations stood wrapped in warmth that no firework could match. It had taken pain and pride and letting go. But in the end, love found its way home. Not in the form of grand gestures, but in the softest things. A hand on your shoulder, the scent of soup simmering, a photo on the wall. And in the quiet voice of a mother who never stopped believing there was still room for grace.